So M. Night Shyamalan is one of the most well-known directors working today. Funnily enough, I actually think compared to a lot of directors that we see putting out films, his name has remained
Hmm.
consistent for quite a long time now. And when you go see a movie, when you see a preview for an upcoming M. Night Shyamalan movie, I feel like that there's always an audible reaction in the theater. I always hear people either very interested and enticed about what they're seeing, or they might also maybe audibly groan in the theater, just depending on what scenario you might be involved in. But I do think that M. Night Shyamalan is one of the more famous directors kind of working today because he's been
Yeah.
consistent for such a long time. He just hit his early 50s and he's already made 15 feature films at this point, which is actually kind of incredible when you think about it. And he's been on a bit of a run lately. We know he had a lull for a while there. He made some really bad films, but recently with this deal over at Universal, he's put out a quite steady, consistent output of psychological thrillers, horror films, things of that nature. And now coming off of Old, which came out a couple of years ago, he comes to us with Knock at the Cabin, starring Dave Bautista, of course. So this is a movie that we were both anticipating, and we got a chance to go check it out this past weekend. So with all of that out the way, man, I will pass it over to you. What did you think about Knock at the Cabin?
Man, you pretty much prefaced it perfectly where M. Night Shyamalan had just been working for so long. And we've also credited him when we did our review of Old, actually, where we commended him, man. We said this is a director who, no matter what, no matter how you feel about him, he swings for the fences. And sometimes it just doesn't always land. How it lands, sometimes it lands, it does great. You get a sixth sense, and other times it doesn't land. And you're like, ooh, why'd you do that movie? The Happening. What is that? But it's so interesting. Every time I go into a film, I never know what to expect from M. Night Shyamalan, no matter what, right? We're so used to the Shyamalan twist. That is like the one thing we kind of try to expect, but it's really anything and everything under the sun with this director, man. I think I'm pleased to say Knock at the Cabin is a good watch. It's if it's somewhere in the middle of everything that M. Night Shyamalan has ever done. He does have a couple of movies in the middle. Like I'd put The Visit in like the middle of that, where like it's a decent movie. It's not great. It's not the worst thing I've ever seen. It just kind of exists in the middle. And Knock at the Cabin kind of exists in that same vein for me, I think, where there's a lot of things that work for me and there's a couple things that don't work for me as well. I will say, man, our guy Dave Bautista shows up and shows out as he does. He's here to act. He's not playing with nobody anymore. He is here for the long run and to really act and give us a good performance in the movies that he's going to be in. The concept of the story, this apocalyptic story, I think will always be interesting to me. It's just something that usually works for me. I love when it's some world-ending stakes are happening. And so I was definitely interested to watch the film. But again, there's a couple of things in here that don't work for me. There's a couple of reveals that don't work for me. There's flashbacks in this film that don't necessarily work for me either. I will say mostly across the board, the performances absolutely work for me. They're probably my favorite part of the film, and just seeing these people act in such a small location. Another thing that does work for me too is the tension in this film. I think M. Night Shyamalan does a great job, I think, of building tension in the movie where you're not exactly sure one what's going to happen next 100%, but also there's this sense of urgency in this film that I really liked. That I was like, ooh, okay, I understand certain choices because it was a very urgent matter happening in the film. So I like that about it too. Another small nitpick is the dialogue didn't work for me 100% sometimes. There are moments in the film I was like, that felt a little cheesy, kind of type thing. In that for me kind of led to a little bit of predictability on my end. After learning that this was a book, I had to be like, okay, what are the differences? I personally like the book ending a little bit more than the way this movie ended, which is fine. They both can exist. And I think I'm glad they both exist. I think me as a person, and as someone who has seen a lot of films, I would have rather have gotten that book ending. I think it means a little bit more to me versus the one in the film. But overall, man, Knock at the Cabin is a fine film. It's one of those again that fits in the middle of the M. Night Shyamalan repertoire, and it's okay, man. I'm gonna look at it for more of the performances, more than I'm gonna look at it for how much I grabbed onto it as a story. I know a lot of people are gonna have conversations around What would you do in that situation? I love those conversations. Those are the conversations I'm looking for to come out of this movie more than anything. So yeah, man, it's a fine movie on my part.
You know, for better and for worse, M. Night Shyamalan, as I said at the top, has been around for a really long time and is one of the most successful directors that we've ever seen. I think people kind of forget about him in that conversation. Like all of his
Hmm.
films, when you put them together, have made $3.4 billion globally. And this is only going to add on to that. That is phenomenal. And most directors can never see that type of success. And so again, the fact that he's been able to sustain it for such a long time at this point, and a lot of people thought that The Sixth Sense was his first movie, but that's not the case. He's been making movies
Hmm.
since the early 90s, came in as a
Right.
really young director in his early 20s, and has just been consistent since then. It's a really phenomenal achievement. And of course, along the way, put out some bad movies, had a string where he was ice cold, Lady in the Water, The
The
Happening, The
Happening,
Last
Last
Airbender. Like there's a
Airbender,
lot of stuff there
Jesus.
that just doesn't work. But I'm happy that the guy was able to find his footing and once again find that spark that made him such a special director in the late 90s and early 2000s. And we talked about this last week before recording that I collectively think that sometimes we go a little bit too hard on him because early in his career, he was pigeonholed as being the director about the twists. That's what he was known for. Now,
Hmm.
he leaned into that a lot, but not all of his movies contain that typical trope. There are some more straightforward stories, this being one of those, Knock at the
Hmm.
Cabin. And I think a large part of that is due to the fact that it is based off of a book that came out a few years ago. He is telling more of a straightforward story. Now, there might be a twist considering that it is a different ending compared to the book, but I think by and large, because he was able to focus on a story that is very familiar, it is pulling from other literary works even beyond the source material in the book. I think
Hmm.
that this is a really satisfying and enjoyable M. Night Shyamalan movie, and it's probably the best thing that he's done in at least a few years. You know, I really like Split and I revisited Glass and I like that movie a lot too upon revisitation. But this is also a really solid movie just for the fact that you have some incredibly strong performances at the center. You have a really intriguing story if you're not familiar with it that's going to leave you very much tense and you're going to wonder,
Hmm.
well, where is this going to end up? Because you can't necessarily predict it because when you think you might know where he's taking his stories and his narrative, all of a sudden he takes the rug out from under you. So there's always that sense of unpredictability. Even if you have read the book, again, you can't forecast where it's going to go because he intentionally changes the ending. And I always like that experience of going into an M. Night Shyamalan movie that I just never necessarily know what I'm going to get. And
Hmm.
of course, that being sort of elevated with really strong character actors, really strong narrative at the center of it is only going to aid in this film. Dave Bautista, the guy is a thespian. He's a true thespian. We had this conversation about best wrestler turned actors. Well, put that conversation to bed. There is no more conversation about it. I'm firmly on the side of Dave Bautista. He's shown me more than enough work in the past 10 years that he
Yeah.
is taking this so serious. He's choosing master directors to work with time and time again. Denis Villeneuve, M. Night Shyamalan, Sam Mendes. Like he is out
Yes.
here to make a name for himself and to really take on challenging roles and complex roles that would completely play against type. And I think that without him in this movie, it probably doesn't work. But because he's such a presence and he's such a calming force, yet somebody that you want to believe, but you don't necessarily know if you can trust, he just
Hmm.
does an exceptional job at really conveying all of those different emotions. And then, really being helped by a supporting cast who I think all were very, very strong here as well. Jonathan Groff, Ben Aldridge, I really liked all of their performances. Everything here mostly worked for me. It's not his best film by any means, but I think that when you just look at the source material, the movie that was told here, the acting performances, and then the last thing that I'll mention, again, that we often don't credit Shyamalan for, but he absolutely deserves credit for. He is an incredibly talented filmmaker behind the camera. His cinematography choices are really, really inspiring. There's some extreme close-ups in this movie
Hmm.
that are beautiful, but simultaneously also unsettling at the same time because you know something bad is going to happen. And just where he places the camera, the angles that he uses are all just expertly done. The way he's able to use a really confined, claustrophobic space to tell this large scale story, if we really think about it, a story that has massive consequences. Like it's really kind of mind-boggling how he takes the minimal amount of resources and crafts something that still feels big and huge. And
Hmm.
still also one of those only directors, at least on this scale, that's self-financing a lot of his own work. He self-financed a lot of the recent movies that came out, The Visit, and I think even Split. He also self-financed. He did the same thing here. Like, he's taking money that he's made from the work that he's done over the years because he believes in these stories, and he's able to turn them around and bring in huge returns at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So he's kind of in his own space right now. He's definitely going after like what Hitchcock did in the 50s and the 60s, but obviously adding on a modern twist to it as well, which we don't get that much of. We don't get that many that are made to this level these days that are still being released in theaters. And so I have to commend him always for taking those swings and being risky with his choices, even if it doesn't always work. I can just appreciate the fact that, like, this guy's an auteur at the end of the day. And when you're an auteur that's behind the camera, that knows his vision, knows what he wants, you're going to be in good hands to some degree. Even if you don't agree with the story and how it ends, you can know, like, well, this is going to look great, or he's going to cast some really, really incredible actors, which he always does. He manages to always pull out some really, really inspiring performers in performances in his films. And so by and large, I enjoyed it. Not his best work, but I do think that, in the past few years, it definitely kind of stands above some of the other recent things that he's done. I'm just curious as to where he goes next, because the fact that he is like in his early 50s, it's kind of crazy to think about. I don't know if he maybe leans into more source material and he takes other stories and try to adapt them for the big screen, or maybe he goes back to an original concept. But what do you think about just like the time that he's sort of existing in right now? The fact that he can create huge box office returns on very small budgets, and he's taking sort of a mix between original stories that he comes up with, but now he's also sort of leaning into maybe literary novels and adapting them for the big screen. What do you sort of see as the space for M. Night Shyamalan now, and how do you see that moving forward in the next few years?
Man, it's crazy because he can really do any and everything that he wants to do. You talk about financing his own films. To me, it's like, well, you can do whatever you want. You know what I mean? There are no restrictions. There is nobody telling you what you can and can't do. And the way also M. Night Shyamalan works, man, is the stories he's telling too are also very different stories from what we just did with the Unbreakable, Split, Glass trilogy into this movie, into Old, are all very different stories that are being told. And so he can, man, I don't know. I really do like how, if anything, he's always had the horror thrillery space, but now it's like, I don't know, the sky's the limit for this guy. And I think hopefully this is a moment where people can at least put some respect on his name. There's a lot of people out there who do disrespect M. Night Shyamalan because of the bad run that he had. And so I think he's in a space now where, again, he's at least been hitting better these past couple movies, right? To where I feel like his confidence is back. Now I'm like, okay, I don't know. Does he swing for the fence again with something crazy, or does he, like you said, go back to something crazy, a source material story? Can you imagine M. Night Shyamalan like doing like a Stephen King book? You know what I'm saying? Like I feel like he'd kill something like that. That's very much a duo that I would look forward to, or something in that vein. So I don't know what he does, man, but I think I just like the idea that he has the autonomy to do whatever he really feels like doing. I think that's a dope place to be if I'm M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah, people do have to respect him. Like, there's no reason to be so harsh on him when you have incredible actors who consistently want to go back and work with him. We talk about Dave Bautista, Jonathan Groff, Samuel L. Jackson, James McAvoy, Bruce Willis, Gael Garcia Bernal, like Bryce Dallas Howard. Like, these are all, Will Smith. Like, he's worked with some of the best in the industry, and so like they know like there's going to be something here to the stories that he's trying to tell. So I think we should definitely always just be anticipating whatever he comes with next. But we will certainly have to see. But folks, those are our thoughts on M. Night Shyamalan's Knock at the Cabin. If you've checked out this film, definitely hit us up and let us know what you think.